Tonight, Rod Smallman. Rod did the last 2018 race on Maverick. Did very well, got on a podium with his son Tyson. So I'm going to hand over to you, Rod. And,
thanks, Martin. And welcome, everyone. What we're going to talk about tonight, so I'm up first with a little bit about integrating your chart plotters and things like expedition weather routing into your instruments, and then Leighton's going to come along and explain a few things in hardware. So we've got software first and then hardware. So tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about navigation software. So essentially you've got sort of things like Expedition and there's others. And for full disclosure, I sell Expedition. So I'm not going to really talk about others. And Leighton's going to come along later and talk about the hardware and what to do with it. There'll be another session that we're going to go into a deeper dive into the actual course and things of interest along the racetrack. But tonight I wanted to just talk about a little bit about hardware, about getting Expedition on your boat. I recommend a fanless SSD computer over like a tough book. It's just a personal thing. It takes up less power, especially if you're using a USB monitor, and you can mount them on the wall and not have them clutter up your nav station too much. Software like Expedition is a one-stop shop, so everything goes on it. You can have your charts, your weather routing, notes, AIS, radar, competitor tracking, all in one stop, rather than having to have 5 or 6 apps going where you're trying to sort things out. So there's enough going on in a 200 race without having to juggle all these apps that will be open. Something like Expedition will be required to satisfy the notice of race, because up in the top right-hand corner of your screen is an extract from the notice of race. It says charts may be electronic, but the primary system shall use official ENCs, electronic navigational charts. So things like CMAP and Navionics are not official charts. And that's a point that needs to be sort of laboured a little bit, that the notice of race says you need to carry your primary system to have official ENC charts. My understanding is, and Leighton will talk about this in a bit, that the latest Raymarine chart plotters have the ability to load ENCs on it, but B&G at the moment do not. I've got some links a little bit later on in my chat to show you where you can get ENCs from. And I've got a little note here to make sure your Japan charts are up to date, because I have a tendency to build things in Osaka Bay, and one of them is an island that they've got this expo on, which is near the finish line. So tonight I'm not sort of giving much detail, but I'm just sort of giving an overview of what you really want to think about. If you're not having paper charts, you need a backup system, and so you've got to think about things like a spare computer, spare notebook, chart plotter. There's your backup system, whether you're going to connect an iPad up to it. A phone's always a great navigation backup. And also things like spare GPS, compass, connectors and cables, that sort of thing, and know and fully understand how they work. Also, the Blue Book says that you need an independent power supply and independent charts for your 2 electronic charting systems. So if you're running a chart plotter and Expedition on a computer, they need to run off independent power supplies. Or you have another one, such as your phone, that can be independently charged from something. And again, Leighton will talk about that. So once you've got your app like Expedition, the main function of that is for weather routing and putting your boat in the right spot. My feeling is that if you want to get on the podium, you need to get your boat in the right spot. So weather is king. And the new Starlink is the game changer for mine, because you essentially get full web access with high-speed internet from your boat. There'll be occasions, maybe in rough storms, where this thing won't work, but not much else works there either. So it doesn't satisfy your NOR requirements for having 2 sat phones, but it's a great bit of extra kit, and I think you'd be mad not to take it. A note that I've got here is if you're only using sat phone, then you really need to consider what sort of grids you're going to download, because download speeds, especially on the cheaper sat phones, just quite slow, and you won't get high res grids, and you've got to worry about how big your grids are going to be in area. So it's going to be quite a different outlook if you're using Starlink or if you're using the sat phone. My one tip for the day is don't worry about weather routing in the doldrums. It just simply doesn't work, because the winds are so light, and the weather routing doesn't really care. It just sends you left and right all over the place looking for the wind. So once you get in the doldrums, the key to it, and there's a little image there, and if you look closely at that image, you'll sort of see that that's New Guinea and the Solomons, and you can download these satellite images and track the clouds and know where the wind's likely to be. And you can track these for days and days and days out. And so that's my tip for getting through the doldrums. Just go max north. The next thing you will also want to think about is compatibility of your instruments and something like Expedition. So you don't want to be setting your routes up or your waypoints up in Expedition and then having to reset them up in your chart plotter as well, or send them to your instruments so that your autopilot can use it. So you want to really think about the compatibility of all your instruments. If your GPS fails, to be able to flick it over to your redundant GPS instrument fairly well. My next point is if you're using a Navionics app and I wouldn't recommend that you're using an Navionics app for your primary navigation, but if you're using it for your backup navigation, make sure that you download all of your charts or the track before you leave, and that's part of the Blue Book requirements as well. A couple of other little things in terms of iPad interfacing. You can do it, don't recommend it. They just end up not working too well, these iPads, and trying to interface them from your chart plotters. Consider your nav station, especially in the doldrums, gets really hot. Think about what your operating temperatures of your computers are, because it does get really hot, and find a way to keep everything cool, including yourself. And remember to keep a proper log. Push button rod. Here we go. So I've got a couple of things here just to think about. And as I said, we'll go into a little bit of a deeper dive in a couple of webinars time in terms of the racetrack. But to figure out where you might want to go, you can download historical grids, and you can actually route each year through these historical grids. If you link it up with the Enzo cycles, you can start to figure out where the wind may or may not be depending on these enso cycles, and that may or should determine where you're going to cross the Solomon Islands. So the preparation for your race, for mine, should be your actual track that you take really should just be a confirmation of what you've already thought about well before you start start your race. And the last point here I'm making is that you're at sea for 30 odd days and you tend to get a little bit tired. So think about, especially the last third of the race, what you might do depending on the conditions that you get. And you might have 4 or 5 different scenarios that you don't really have to think about because you've thought about them before. The image that's up here at the moment is the Kuroshio current, and that changes not dramatically, but over time it changes quite significantly. And at the time that you're going to be racing into Osaka Bay next year, you're probably going to have, if you notice that kink of the Kuroshio current coming out from the Japan coast, generally you'll have that right in your face for 2 or 3 days. So you've got to think about getting around it and not lining it up and going through it. If you're going to become a specialist in terms of weather routing, become a specialist in current. You've got the East Australian current going up the Australian coast. You've got the equatorial current going right to left through the doldrums, and then you've got this Kuroshio which guards the Japanese coast with a vengeance, and some of this current can be well upwards of 6 knots. So I also got here a few resources of where you can get your ENC charts. So you can get all your ENC charts through Chart World, or you can get them through the Japan Hydrographic Association, or you can get them through the Australian Hydrographic Office. There's also a link there for the Copernicus site to get historical grids. The US NOAA site will give you free NCs through the Mariana Islands because that's US territory, so you can get them free through there. The one that I would recommend most is this maritime safety information, which gives you a whole bunch of stuff, including sailing directions, planning guides. It gives you a spiel on virtually every island that you're going to go past, every port that you may or may not want to go into. It gives you full list of lights. That is a myriad of information that you're going to need, and I'm pretty sure that that'll be a requirement when the sailing instructions come out. So just to recap a little bit, you're going to need some sort of an app like Expedition or the latest Raymarine to be compliant with the notice of race for the official ENC charts. Once you get that, it's a matter of linking it into your boat and making sure that you're most efficient in getting the information to and from the app. So that's me in terms of charting and nav systems and my couple of tips. Any questions?
I'm just going to lead a couple. It was probably more a comment than a question. The Starlink, you mentioned Starlink a few times, but I guess we need to tell people to be very, very careful of the plan they get in terms of their ability to use it offshore.
Yeah, 100%. And that really comes back on the skipper to make sure they get the right plan. You can get the appropriate plan to be able to travel. My understanding is that it's geo-referenced as well, so certain plans will just not work outside of your assigned, won't work out of Australia. So you've got to be careful and you've got to do your research. It's not going to be a replacement for a SAT for a sat phone, but as I said, gives you high-speed internet right along the racetrack.
One of the things there on Starlink is that you're right, providers are probably one of the biggest issues regarding it. You know, some of the better plans are actually through Starlink Direct and via the US. I know that the unlimited Pivotel plan for unlimited data is $52,000 a month. Which is just insane. And their base plan, which is $250, is only 50 gig a month. So be really, really wary of that.
Yeah, good point.
And Telstra would apply the same. Telstra's plans will be terrible.
Yeah. Good point. Now we've got a question from Cyrus. What are the leading alternatives for E&C usage? Cyrus, unmute if you need to clarify that, but does that make sense, that question, Rod?
Yeah, not really.
I guess.
Sorry, Cyrus, you're going to have to unmute yourself and ask that.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So, Rod, thank you. You're talking about Expedition as one of the packages that can integrate in ENCs. I was just wondering for the rest of the team, what are the alternatives in terms of software packages they can use?
We got Maxi. There's a couple of European models. You've got OpenCPN. You've just got to make sure.
Does Cyrus mean different reader software to actually read the ENCs or different actual ENCs?
My understanding is that he's asking were there different software packages other than Expedition.
That's correct.
Yeah, there are a few, Cyrus. Like, so Maxi's got one. There's a couple of European ones. There's the Open CPN, and that's a freebie, but it's a, I don't know. I don't like using it.
And just keep in mind that any Raymarine chart plotter that's using Lighthouse for software in it can now run ENC charts. So for maybe some of the less computer literate people that have Raymarine, that may be a preferred alternative for them.
Good point.
The disclaimer there is that it's only the new Raymarine chart plotters. You can't chuck ENC charts onto your 50.
Yeah, as long as it's got Lighthouse for operating system, it'll work.
Yep.
But you have to get you know, a dealer to activate that ability for you.
Okay, trips for the unwary. So if they're looking at something like that, perhaps a phone call to yourself or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, terrific. Thanks, Rod. What we might do is now hand over to Paul.
I got a clap.
Yeah.
Does Expedition? Yes, it does. Expedition.
It's Leighton next.
Oh, beg your pardon, Leighton next.
Yeah.
Expedition integrate with B&G. Yeah.
Yep.
G'day, guys. For those of you who are not Melbourne based, my name's Leighton. I've done a fair bit of offshore sailing myself. I'm a marine electrician based out of Sandringham. We do cover all of Victoria, and look for the Osaka people. If you've got questions, you can always look me up and give me a call. I'm more than happy to give you assistance and a bit of guidance over the phone. So one of the things we want to talk about really is just the instrument systems. There's pretty much only two sensible manufacturers out there from a yachting perspective, and that is B&G or Raymarine. If you're using, unfortunate enough to maybe have a Garmin system on board, one of the things you're going to find is that the wind instrument in heavy winds is at least plus or minus 15 degrees. It's quite a big unit, and because of that instability, trying to sail with your autopilot at anything above, you know, say 20 knots of boat speed or 20 knots of wind speed, sailing to wind angle, it's not going to have the accuracy, and it will be all over the place and potentially dangerous. So you're really limited to B&G and Raymarine from that. One of the things to keep in mind, most of our systems these days, or all of our new systems, they're what we call NMEA 2000 or NTK. They're primarily a CAN bus system, and they there's certain rules around how you do your CAN bus system to make sure that you don't cause problems with it and to make it reliable. It is a really reliable system when it's been installed properly and really maintained. So the the things that you sort of want to be making sure that you've got going on is a really well set up system, and you want to have that integrated to all of your systems. So having a compatible autopilot and the same brands working with your instruments and everything like that is definitely an advantage that you won't have if you've got a bit of a mix and match system. Your modern systems will also interface very, very well with PC-based software. In particular, B&G will allow you to do a lot of wireless connections for your data. They transmit over their Wi-Fi system NMEA 0183 data, whereas Raymarine does not. So you'd have to have a hardwired system for Raymarine. Let's go back one, please, Rob. Your modern chart plotters and things like that to think about is, in heavy weather, whether you want to go touchscreen only or whether you want knobs on it. There are times when you've got terrible weather that the touchscreen only displays can be problematic, and they're also you need to lock the screen if you're getting water wash coming over them. They can be quite difficult to then unlock again if they've got wet and still got waves coming over. So it's something to think about. Your modern autopilot systems will have your solid state 9-axis gyro compasses and that with them. These are fantastic, really reliable units, but at the end of the day, they're only as good as the calibration that you've done for them. So accurate calibration is really, really important. We looked at something actually for the last Osaka one where we looked at just an average of 2 degrees of inaccuracy on your wind versus half a knot of inaccuracy on your boat speed versus 1 or 2 degrees inaccuracy of your heading sensor will equate to around about 14 or 15 degrees of error on your true wind angle. So there's something to really, really be wary of, that the accuracy when you're traveling, especially over very large distances, if you don't have really, really accurate instruments, you're actually taking a longer trip to get there. With your autopilots and stuff like that, Rod and I have, for the time that we've been sailing offshore two-handed, we have had autopilot remote controls. They are definitely the way to go. When you're solo sailing up on deck, every boat should probably have that system. It just leaves your hands free all the time to be going and handling tacking or jibing, sail changes, that sort of stuff. Really, really important. Probably important to think about it too if you're going to have it, to have two, because, the accidental one of maybe getting flooded or being dropped overboard, can really make things quite difficult for you. So you do need some redundancies if you're going to have your Bluetooth auto hum controllers.
Slide.
Oh yeah, this slide's just showing a few examples of some pretty pictures. Yeah. All of your the people ask all the time, which is better to have, B&G or say Raymarine. Since Hugo Boss has got involved in using Raymarine, they've really stepped up their game. For more novice electronic users, the Raymarine system certainly has a lot of advantages. You can do polars and that directly through your chart plotter. Their autopilot is actually incredibly good. It's definitely going to get you there. They're very, very reliable. They've got great after-sales service and that in different countries. The B&G's got a lot more, probably more accurate race information for the ones that are a little bit more die-hard and trying to find that extra percentage with things like polar performance and that sort of stuff. Yeah, so recommending. Yep. So that stuff we've pretty well already covered. So we'll jump on to the next one. This is just showing your basic enemy A2000 type system. One of the things with B&G, they've got different levels now of their system. If you're really, really advanced and you're a high tech, guru, having the H5000 system, you will get some advantages out of it. But you need to be editing and you need to be working on your numbers and your settings as you go. Whereas if you're using, say, like the Triton 2 system, maybe with an Edge performance processor, it's for the people that are just maybe not going to make those changes and work on the development of their performance as they go. It's still a fantastic autopilot system. When just well set up initially, it's a pretty well leave it alone and just away you go, and you wouldn't have to really make any corrections or fine tuning of that system all the way to Osaka. A couple of things here just on the autopilot drives themselves. Definitely recommend, and if you talk to anyone that's done Osaka in the past, everybody who's fairly keen will probably carry a spare autopilot RAM. Now, one of the things about doing that is you need to make that set up in a way that it's very, very easy to change it over. So you can have a spare one sitting in the box under the bunk, but instead of having, screw type connectors, just have proper solid waterproof plugs that you can unplug one drive and plug into the other. If you lose your hydraulic RAM or electric RAM while you're doing the race, in some instances for some people that might mean that you have to retire from the race. So, it's quite a fairly important bit of kit. There's just some images of some RAMs. There's also chain-driven RAMs and there's rotary drives and all of that. Most of your production boats will have something like a Type 1 or Type 2 linear hydraulic RAM, like in the top right-hand corner. They're generally overrated for the boat, which is fantastic. So if you're doing your own autopilot, don't go for something cheaper. Go for what's really designed properly for the boat. It's going to make a difference. If you put something a little bit too small on, you're pretty well guaranteed to break it. Final slide. Any questions?
How often should you calibrate your system?
That's a really good question. That has changed significantly over the years. If you were dealing with the old H3000, H2000 systems from B&G, you were expected to calibrate those before every race. And with your more modern systems, we tend to do a calibration with the latest B&G stuff in H5000, once a year, maybe twice a year, or if you've had to change a piece of equipment. It's quite interesting too with the modern systems. If you're running a barometric sensor, the barometric sensor is factored into your wind speed calculation and that, because that can vary due to air density. So, that's something quite important. Yep. Someone's asking about checks you should make. I highly recommend that for your whole electrical system, you should have a checklist of things that you maybe do as daily checks, weekly checks, and that sort of stuff. Actually checking the levels of your hydraulic fluids. Hopefully you haven't got a leak, but if you start to get one, a RAM will run for a considerable amount of time if it's got a small leak in it, if you're just topping it up, once a day or once a week. Depending on, the size of the leak, you'll be able to keep it going. With electric RAMs, there's pretty much no maintenance. But you do want to make sure that they haven't got wet. They generally, the electric ones, they've got a motor in them. They are IP, 67 rated, but they're not 68. So they won't take, having water sloshing around in your quadrant area.
We in the SSC, Leighton, one of the case studies is actually of a boat that the autopilot did run out of fluid.
Yeah.
And then it went erratic and accidental jibed and killed 2 people. So actually doing those checks.
So checking fluids is really, really important. And also making sure before you even start the race, really checking over this stuff and making sure that you haven't got early signs of a leak. Because when you start to use that pilot for days at a time, you're really pushing it, and the oils and that heat up in it. It's definitely worth making sure you haven't got any pre-existing damage. The biggest cause of leaks and seals and that in hydraulic systems is caused by rust and stuff on the shaft actually taking out the seal.
And I guess if you didn't have a bottle of top-up oil, then that would be pretty hard anyway.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, I know in when we in the early days of offshore racing, we used to check the keel bolts every day. You know, it doesn't seem to happen as much as it used to. It's still something that should be on your checklist. You know, the same with your electrical systems, checking that your batteries are okay, checking that your ram's okay, just inspecting the quadrant area, make sure no water or anything's in that area. You know, all of those things are going to contribute to a failure if they're not, you know, kept on top of.
Fantastic. Have we got any other questions through chat or voice? Well, thanks, Leighton. Thanks for your time tonight.
No worries.
We might hand over to Paul now.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks, Leighton, for your presentation. Look, so my name is Paul Roberts. My profession is an instrument electrical engineer, and I'm a past competitor for the last couple of Osakas, and I'm going to present the electrical power systems and management. So, look, at the end of the day, your power system and your batteries are one of your main, you know, critical parts, apart from instruments and your weather systems and routing and navigation. The power in your boat is very critical to get you to Osaka. So there's a few key objectives there. You need to, for preparation of your boat, you need to ensure that your battery capacity and your generation capacity is going to meet all your normal loads, including, you know, your big ticket items, your fridge and your auto helm, which we were just talking about. And we also need to, one of the other key objectives here for your power generation is your fuel usage. And obviously high reliability. We want something that's, you know, that is very reliable. You know, your alternators, they can fail, particularly in the, you know, the hotter climates going across the equator. And obviously, depending on the type of boat, I mean, there's generally two types of boats in the Osaka. Obviously, a lightweight racing boat, and there's a cruising type yacht, and there's obviously yachts that are in between a cruiser and a racer. So if you've got an absolute racing boat and you're preparing it for the Osaka, you want to minimise your weight. So you may go in a different direction, i.e. lithium-ion batteries. If you've got a cruising type boat, you may be looking at different technology for your battery capacity, your battery storage. So from a power management, you need, you know, early you need to develop a bit of a plan. You need to look at review and audit of what you have, and you need to assess, you know, the modifications you'll need to make to your yacht to make sure you have enough power to get to Osaka, including the generator and the battery options. So you need to look at what you're going to buy. You're going to look at the installation modification options, whether you're going to pay someone to do it or you want to do it as a bit of a DIY or a mix between the two. And obviously you need, once you install this, you need to pre-test it and commission it properly so that you iron out all the bugs associated with it, because it's never you can never buy all this equipment, install it, and it's right to go to Osaka. You're always going to be tweaking it. So get this done early in your campaign and test it, i.e. the West Coaster or some of the long races that you're going to carry out prior to the Osaka race. Okay, so these are a few tips here. You need to determine your total loads, and to do that, you need a very good quality monitor. And I've got here a Victron unit that's very popular, very cost effective, and it requires a shunt unit to measure the current going in and out of your batteries. So one of these very valuable. There's other brands obviously on the market. And the other things you need to look at is how old your batteries. You should have some very high quality, good batteries. And you need to look at your engine. Now, how reliable is your engine for you if it's your primary means of power generation with your alternator? Now, how old's your alternator? Do you need to carry a spare? Because one of the things that, and when you get into the tropics, is it gets very, very hot and alternators will fail in the heat. And you may, operate your boat in Victoria. As soon as you get up to the tropics, that's when you'll have some issues with the heat. Okay, and I mentioned have a battery monitor is absolute gold for a boat, because you'll be monitoring that, as Leighton mentioned. One of the things on these long races to Osaka is that you'll be daily, every watch you take, you need to check the battery voltage and work out what your current, you flick through and look at your current consumption of all your bits and pieces on your boat. For example, if you're in the tropics, your fridge will be running absolutely flat out. It will be going all the time, whereas in the colder climates, it'll be cutting in and out. So there's a massive difference in power consumption when you go through the tropics. The other thing is look at your alternator. You recommend at least 120 amp hour. You probably, if you really want to look at a lightweight, particularly lightweight racing boat, and you want to minimise your fuel usage, you need to at least look at a 200 amp alternator. Again, in the tropics, when they heat up, they derate themselves. So you won't see 200 amps in your battery monitor on a 200 amp alternator in the tropics. And the other consideration is you need to look at the site, your wiring, your cables, because if you swap out your alternator and say it's only an 80 amp hour alternator and you're going up to 200, more than likely you'd need to look at increasing the size of that cable that comes from your alternator. Okay, so if we look at some upgrade options, so you need to look at the alternator. It needs to be a high quality type alternator, and recommend a smart regulator. And I'll come to that in shortly about smart regulators. You need to look at your cable and your wiring. You need to look at your battery monitoring devices, as I mentioned, and you need to look at potentially voltage sensitive relays. They're more so for the old AGM type batteries, but when you go to lithium ion batteries, it's a complete different type of system you need. You need to look at regulators, particularly with a smart regulator. They come with a temperature sensor which you can attach to the actual alternator to measure the temperature and also the batteries. And the key there is that when you get to the tropics and things heat up, the smart regulator will back off your output of your regulator to minimise the overheating of that alternator so it doesn't fail. Some boats, for example, I think Cyrus's big Beneteau 50's got a separate generator, and that'd be great. So you'll have two methods of power generation. You could have a dedicated generator on a boat. Obviously, is very fuel efficient because it's just made for generating power. There's other options out there. We talk about wind, solar panels, and the hydro. And the other thing there is about solar panels. They're very good as a secondary. I wouldn't call them a primary source of power, but they are an effective method of power generation. And particularly if you've got the coach roof space and a bimini, you can put them up there on some of the bigger cruising boats. I'll just give an example here. This is something I did myself during the COVID. My previous race boat, I put in a new lithium-ion battery system, and I built it up with some fuses. I made it so when you're going along and a fuse breaks, you can just easy access to it. I don't know if it's very obvious, but I put the key there is to label everything on your devices so that, I don't know if you can see that on your picture, but that says an alternator. That's a big 250 amp hour fuse. So if that blows, then you need spares and it's easy to get to. I'll just give an example here of a very high quality alternator system with a smart regulator. That's a Balmar, it's an American brand. It's a very high quality, and you can buy those as a package. One of the latest smart regulators on the market is the Wake Speed, and that is just a later generation. You basically configure it all in an iPhone app, and you can download it and configure the unit. It's a very, and the advantage of the wake speed is that they're specifically made for lithium-ion batteries because they interface into an existing shunt and they measure the current that's going in and out of your batteries and your alternator for the control of it. And it's more related to lithium-ion batteries. I'll just give an example here. Smart regulators, I won't go into any detail here. There's a lot of detail in there. You can configure them. You can, when you start your engine, you can configure them as a soft ramp up. So they won't just start pulling the power. They wait till your engine is warmed up and then it will progressively, slowly bring on the load. Okay, battery options. Look, again, this comes down to budget and the type of boat. I mean, if you, these days, if you're on a serious racing boat, you definitely would be looking at lithium-ion batteries. And you'd need, an advantage of lithium-ion batteries over AGM type is that you can you can basically run a current into a lithium-ion battery of around, say, a 200 amp hour Victron battery can take 100, 150 amps charging current, whereas an AGM battery, you'd be looking at starting at 10, maybe 20 amps, 25 amps for a 100 amp hour AGM battery, and then they won't take much when they get warmed up. So there's a big advantage of lithium-ion batteries where you just run your, say you're running your generator on the Osaka race, if you've got it well set up, you may only have to run the engine for 1 or 2 hours a day, as opposed to if you had AGM batteries, you might be running it for 3 or 4 hours a day. So there's big advantages with lithium-ion batteries. So with a lithium-ion battery setup, one thing you need a BMS system. Only if you've got, and that's depending on the type of lithium-ion batteries you've got. There's basically 2 types. There's a drop-in type lithium-ion battery which has an inbuilt BMS, and there's the Victron system which requires an external BMS, and yeah, different type of systems. I would recommend the Victron system. It's a great value for what you're paying, and it's a very good system, reliable. Okay, if we look at other power generation options, we've got wind generators. They're noisy and they struggle with high winds. We've got solar we talked about, that's a good supplement. But my favourite type of other power is a hydro generator, which is shown on the back of it, which is basically it's a little propeller which hangs off the transom, and they are very effective. I would highly recommend you buy one of these for your campaign, because the other thing is you buy it, and if you're not going to use it when you get back, you probably only you probably sell it very fast and probably not lose a lot of money on them.
Sorry to interrupt, Paul. I was just going to see if Rod wanted to comment. I know he used one of these for the last race and was very successful.
They were awesome, man. They we had that plus a backup solar, which was all connected into it, and we never pulled the solar out. Depending on the propeller that you use, these things will fully charge from about 6 knots upwards, and they are minimal to no drag on the boat. They're just crazy good.
Yep, no, thanks, Rod. So the big Watt and C is probably the biggest supplier of these. I think there's a couple other brands, and I think they're around, just to give you a ballpark figure, around the $5,000 upwards of these units. There's 2 different types. There's a racing version, which is all carbon fiber, and there's a cruising version. So there's different types of these hydro generators, and they are particularly, if you look at the Vendée Globe race, pretty much every one of the Mocha 60 uses these units. In fact, they have probably 2 of them on the back for use, and they're very effective. Okay, just to note, when there is a few issues with power systems in the tropics because of the heat. There's high power consumptions, and like I mentioned, the fridge is running all the time, and it's some alternators and everything does not work as efficiently because of the heat. Same with the batteries. AGM batteries are really not very effective in the tropics. Okay, so know your systems. I mean, I put this drawing up here. This is a drawing I put together for a battery upgrade I did on my previous boat, which is related to that box that I showed you that I built up. And this is important, particularly if you want to know your boat. You won't be able to ring up the installer and say, I've got a problem, where do I look? But if you've got this drawing on board and you know your system, it makes things a lot easier. Okay, if you talk about fuel requirements, if you look at the NOR requirements, there's a formula here that determines what the minimum fuel you need to take. And if you work all that out, I did a bit of a calc here for a 12-metre boat. You need 141 litres. On the last, the 2013, I think we took, Martin, I think we took around the 200 litre mark. And I think we ended up having 70 litres left over. But
remember at the tropics we had to decide between the fridge and the auto helm.
That's right.
One of them had to go.
That's right. Yeah. So anyway, you need to consider your battery charging and work out, depending on the size of your boat, the speed of your boat, you need to say, look, you're looking at 3 hours charging a day, worst case, with a fuel consumption of about 1.5 litres per hour. And that's 4.5 litres per day. And if you allow that for a 35-day race, you're up to around 158 litres. So, which is more than what the minimum fuel you need to take, but also you need to allow extra fuel in case you have a problem and you need to motor. So just be aware and work out, that's why it's important your charging system and whether you got a hydro generator or how you're going to supplement your power management. Okay, I've just got a note on here on safety. So definitely make sure you've got smoke detectors, again, in the tropics, or you might have an electrical issue on your engine compartment with your alternator. Make sure you've got smoke detectors around. And even look at nozzles in your engine compartment for a fire extinguisher in case you do have a fire. I mean, recent example was that, I don't know if everyone saw that Miss Scarlet, the Rockall Q, off the Queensland coast, that basically had an electrical fire, and I believe it had lithium-ion batteries on it, and that caught fire, and they didn't, and they were lucky to escape because it was all around the cockpit during the entrance down below to get down to the boat. Okay, any questions?
It's Kev. Just on that, the safety of the fire on board, I can tell you, anyone that's got a jet boil, just be very careful of when they boil dry. They will actually melt the pot. Ask me how, I know. Yeah, so they'll melt it. They'll melt the wetsuit rubber that goes around the outside, and you've got like a Venturi effect as the flame goes up the empty canister. And mine was about, I don't know, 40 or probably 400 mil from the ceiling of the underside of the deck, and it was black and blistered. So put your, if you get the smoke detector and put it right next to it, it'll actually pick up steam, the photoelectric ones. It'll pick up the steam and it'll go off when your kettle boils or when your jug boils. Just a tip.
Yep, thanks, Kevin.
Just going back over the question. So we had a question from Cyrus relating to hydro charges. So effectively you are falling back to solar generator engine in the doldrums at low boat speed. So in other words, you're concerned across in the doldrums, you're not going to have the speed for that hydro to work.
No, that's correct. That's where you would be using your engine or your generator in the doldrums, and a bit of solar. You get a fair bit of solar, but the solar, the sun rises quite late, and it basically sets very early. So there's not a lot of daylight in the doldrums either.
Paul, we didn't use our solar at all, just lived under the bed. And in total, we used 45 litres of fuel for charging when we were going too slow for the hydro generator. So they work most of the time.
Yeah, excellent.
I got a note from Kevin de Portevin. I use ocean power hydro generators from Germany. Many WNS generators had issues in the Global Solar Challenge. In other words, he was looking at brands. Be careful of brands, I think his point was.
Yeah, it
Okay.
was from also the mounting and the seals was the what and see issues that they had. The way that the standard mounting brackets were breaking. People that had custom design ones did somewhat better, but transferred the breakage point to somewhere else. So it's just something to be aware of.
Good point.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've read the hydro generators. You've got to take spare blades and all sorts of spares on them because, like you said, I've watched a lot of the Amoka videos and the Funday Globe, and they end up having to repair a lot of those hydro generators. So you've got to take lots of spare parts with you and know how to replace them.
I broke 3 blades off hitting things. Broke one hub, or sorry, 2 hubs. So it was mainly hitting things, big balls of fishing line, who knows what. But yeah, they were just they were carbon blades as well.
Yeah, and
I know Cold
leads...
Brow rebuilt hers 3 times on her what and see. Actually stripped down the actual generator.
Okay.
Very
just
good
a
point.
bit off topic there while you mentioned that, Kevin. One thing that you know competitors need to think about is the type of anti-foul they put on a boat, and it's my mind. I highly recommend a hard anti-foul because you will be dragging lots of stuff across your keel during this race because there's so much debris in the ocean, nets, and everything else gets strung around your rudder and your keel.
Yeah, exactly.
Good point. We have a comment from Daryl Gregg that with a suggestion of using Starlink, that's a big power usage item to be considered. I guess a lot of those run on inverter 240, don't they?
That's a good question.
Can I just weigh in on that?
Yep.
The Starlink uses 70 milliwatts of power at its peak on startup when it's hunting, and it drops back to 50. So it actually uses hardly any power. In most cases, we're doing installs with them just with a sine wave inverter. That's quite crucial to cut down any electrical noise, but just a 500 watt sine wave inverter, and it's only being used then at 10%.
Yep. So you have a very small one just for that, dedicated.
There's a lot of, that's a good question, Lethan. And what I've read, it depends on the generation of the Starlink because they're up to the 3rd generation. And there's a lot of stuff on Facebook groups on Starlink about the different generators and power over Ethernet injectors, power supplies, and like you said, sine wave inverters. There's a lot of people that are made up because some of them are 48 volt DC. So a lot of people make converters.
They're 48. They are 48, but the problem is a lot of these forums, there's people doing stuff on them. It's just unnecessary. They're overcomplicating it. And there's a lot of rubbish out there and untruths on a lot of these forums. That's why you're better off talking to a proper installer about it. Honestly, they use so little power that, you know, and they really shouldn't be tampered with. You shouldn't be doing power over Ethernet. They just run on 48 volts. And the simplest way to use it's just through a 240 volt inverter.
But a small one, you're saying. So
yeah, just they only need the smallest sine wave inverter that you can get is about 500. They don't really, you know, if you could get a smaller one, I'd use a smaller one. And they're about that's about $110 for the sine wave inverter. And just use it for that. You can use it then for other bits of 240 volt charging for your phones and that sort of stuff if you wanted to as well.
Good point. We had a question from Christian Kenfield. A fire involving lithium batteries is very difficult to extinguish.
Can I answer that one as well?
The fear over lithium, yeah.
Yeah, so there is a special fire extinguisher designed for lithium batteries. It's called an F500. The smallest ones they come with is a 9 kilo. So I can guarantee you that if you had a lithium battery catch fire, it's probably going to go through the bottom of the hull and leave a big rectangle hole before you could get the fire extinguisher out.
Yeah. And the other thing there is it depends on if you protect your battery with the proper BMS and i.e. it's installed properly and you're using a very good brand, i.e. Victron, and it's set up right, you should not have a problem with lithium-ion batteries.
Yeah, so beware the cheapies.
Correct.
Good. Another one from Kevin about weed on the hydro as a killer. So have we got any other questions, open mic questions for Paul? Maybe again a maintenance question, Paul. What maintenance should you do along the way with your electrical systems? Preventative checks and things like that.
Sure. One thing that is definitely loose connections on. I had the last Osaka. I just had a fire, and it was over the water ballast switch, and the wire connections were loose, and that was causing just shorts, and that was smoking, just about caught the boat on fire. So I would go around, check all the battery terminals, make sure they're tight. It's mainly electrical connections associated with electrical equipment which can cause you grief.
So everything grounded, everything fused.
Correct. Yep.
Like how many boats do you see, Leighton, where you look in the bilge or something, they've gone direct connections to the battery or something like that?
Oh, I see some horrible stuff. One of the things, if you're dealing with high current stuff, I always fuse them at both ends. One fuse it's one thing to have a fuse there to protect the item that you're trying to protect, but by putting a fuse at both ends, you're actually protecting the wiring. So if you do get water ingress or damage, or you've got a problem, you're not going to then have live wiring and that, say, hanging in your bilge area, especially for things like thrusters, windlasses and stuff like that. Or if you've got charging between a second set of batteries, fusing in between those is really key. So
big breaker type fuse either end. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. In fact, resettable breakers, when you're dealing with things like Osaka, then you don't have to take spare fuses and that with you as well. So, if it pops, you can always then reset it. And if it pops straight away, you've got a serious problem. Fuses don't blow for no reason. That's the other thing. See so many times people go and they blow a fuse and then they go and upgrade it. So, that might have started with a 3 and now they put in a 10 and the 10 blows, so they put in a 20. Well, the rating of the wiring was probably only designed around about 5 or 6 amps in the first place. So you're now actually melting your wiring because, you're starting to hide the problem. So never ever replace a fuse with a larger one. It's very dangerous.
And again, spares, it's hard to replace a fuse if you don't carry spare fuses.
Yeah, and that's where some of these resettable breakers are actually a far better idea. For your automotive styles, you can get resettable ones of those. You can also get ones that have an LED in them for helping you with your diagnostics, so that if you do have a fuse blow in an area that you can't see very well, either have the resettable and you can just press them back in, or the ones with the light will be on to tell you that fuse is blown.
So you don't just wrap it in alfoil?
The other thing that
or a nail, yeah.
Well, the other thing to help you fault find those situations, you need to take a good quality multimeter with you and learn how to use it, so you can measure the voltages and see where you may have a short. It's an absolute necessity for an Osaka boat.
So Leighton, block your ears for a minute. But Paul, do you do it yourself or do you go and get experts to do it?
It depends on your ability, because it depends. You need to think about the design of it for a start. It's not just a matter of whether you can do it or not. You need to be competent. And if you're going to do it yourself, you need to talk to someone that's done it all before, that understands electrical equipment.
Anyone who's thinking about doing lithium needs to ask their insurance company first. That's what I tell anyone coming into me. A lot of the insurance companies now will not allow you to go lithium. And if you do, there's huge restrictions around it. There's some Australian standards now that have been developed for lithium in boats. They require that it must be professionally installed. It must come with a certificate of compliance. And there's very, very strict rules around it. Personally, the risks of lithium, I believe, outweigh the benefits.
Hang on, vice versa, or did you mean that?
I think that having lithium, the risks are too high.
Oh, okay. Yep.
I wouldn't. Let me put it this way: I wouldn't put them in my boat.
Interesting food for thought.
And insurance is a real key one, because a lot of the insurance companies now won't insure you for lithium.
Okay, we had a question from Grant. I guess it depends on what style of battery you go for, but he's talking about how much amp hour capacity would you recommend? And I think, Paul, you had it on one of your slides. But
Yeah,
do you want
I
to go
have
back to
that. If you look through those slides, Grant, you'll see the calculation that you'll need to look at all you basically will need to look at how much power you're consuming per day, and then you need to aim at being able to recharge your batteries, probably running your engine 1 or 2 hours a day. That's what I'd be aiming at.
So if
A
Grant
rule
put
of
a
thumb
good
would
quality,
be around about 400 amp hours would be a rule of thumb.
Yeah, 600 amp hours is AGM, I assume you mean, not AMG. Would be pretty. You're pretty much on the money there at about 600 amps. That's a fair bit of house battery capacity.
so that's 300 usable roughly.
Yes, correct. At 50% usage. So 300 amp hours per day is a lot of power.
It is. If you got old battery, AGM, if you were going the Osaka, Leighton or Paul, and you had 2-year-old batteries, what would you do?
I would get them properly load tested, and different batteries require different types of testing. Your AGMs require, a different type of meter, so you can't just do a normal current load test on them because that'll lie to you about what you've got there. You will know if you've got your batteries are 2-year-old and you're finding that they're not as good as they were, a year ago. I'd be replacing them. It's as simple as that. Just do the math. If they used to last you 12 hours before you had to charge, and now they're only lasting you 6, I think, it's pretty simple. Yeah. You've answered your own question.
Oh, I agree. So if you fully charge them and you go do a West Coast or several days sailing, you'll know when you monitor them how the voltage characteristic and how it holds its voltage based on the current that it's consuming. You'll have a fair idea how it's performing.
And Paul, you mentioned those battery monitors, being able to see the amps in and the amps out and the percentage load, all that sort of stuff. Fantastic.
Exactly.
All right. Any other questions from anyone? I think we're coming up on a wrap, Paul. Do you want to take us through the last couple of slides?
Sure. Okay, so we've got the Melbourne Osaka race has got an official sponsor partner, Musto, and so Musto are going to provide they're going to provide the shirts, the competitor shirts for the race, and they're also going to provide a special deal, a special Osaka discount on all their other sailing gear, which will be announced further details. And yeah, we've got a next session. The next session is going to be on Wednesday, the 29th of May, starting at a similar time, and that'll be our boat preparation number 2, and that'll cover the radio comms, safety rigs, engines, water makers. So I hope everyone enjoyed tonight's session. We've got more to come, so we'll be preparing that, and we'll have some other presenters. And I hope everyone enjoyed this session. If there's anything else, please ask questions in the chat about any of the upcoming events.
We are going to hang around for a while, and I think on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank Rod, Leighton, and Paul for giving up their time tonight and giving us that great presentation. So thank you.